What's going on, everybody? Welcome back to the channel. Thank you so much for joining me. So I just had to renew the registration on the Aprilia RSV4, which means it's been a year since I've had this bike. So let's talk about that first year: warranty, operating costs, reliability issues, modifying the bike, working on it myself. Let's talk about all those things right now. Just want to do a quick overview of the RSV4 before we take it out for a spin. Still not done yet, but it's had quite a bit done to it so far. You can see a lot of carbon behind that WRS windscreen, carbon mudguard, Evotech radiator guards, SC Project GP22 exhaust, has a Gabbro tune to go along with it, carbon, Moto Dynamic tail tidy, TWM chain adjuster, moving back up front, TWM levers, Rizoma mirrors, Light Tech mirror block offs. This is pretty cool. This is an AEM factory fuel lid. This is actually for a Ducati Panigale, but I was able to adapt it to work on this bike. So that's kind of a unique thing, but still a few more things to do to it, but that's where it sits at the moment. Do a little walk around there. All right, so let's go ahead and hop on. Okay, so let's hop on this thing real quick. I apologize for the sound. I had to mess with my mic's gain and some of the other settings just because this bike is so loud. In order for you guys to hear anything I want to say, had to change all that, but let's hear what this bike sounds. One of the best parts of this bike, the engine. Okay, let's go. So easily the question that I get the most about this bike is regarding the reliability. So for me personally, I have had no issues with this bike as far as reliability goes. I did have one warranty claim, and that warranty claim was for the gas tank. The finish on the fuel tank, it actually cracked, it failed, and the dealership as well as Aprilia was really good about that claim. They didn't question me, they didn't ask, oh well, what detailing products do you use? Did you use any ceramic coating on it? They didn't try to make it difficult for me to put that claim in. They just, no questions asked, hey, yeah, we're gonna cover it. It did take a while to get the part, however. So I think if I remember right, it took about 2 months or so, maybe 3 months to get the part, to get the actual fuel tank itself. But you know, other than that, I've had no issues with this bike. So I want to be clear though, just because I haven't had any issues, that doesn't mean that we should discredit or discount other owners who have had issues with these bikes. The issues with these bikes, they're pretty well documented, and most of those problems came from the 2021 and 2022 model year. Basically, what happened with those bikes is a lot of those bikes from those two model years had a lot of oil leak issues. So mostly coming from the valve cover gasket. It was found that a lot of those bikes, from the factory, the install itself was a poor install. So that's pretty much since been fixed after 2022. Overheating was also an issue for 2021s and 2022s, at least some of them. There was actually a recall for it. And the reason for that overheating was because, I don't know how this happened, but they were getting filled with 100% coolant, so no dilution, no mixture, just 100% coolant, and that was causing the overheating issues. But that's since been fixed since then. There's been other issues too, but those are going to be the primary ones. So I don't want to say, oh, just because I haven't had any issues, that means these bikes are 100% reliable and I don't know what anybody's talking about. No, that's not it. It's just, for me, I can only speak to my experience. I can only speak to how my ownership experience has been. So, thank you. The part of the video where I remind you to hit that like button, hit the subscribe button, leave a comment down below, check out the affiliate links and coupon codes for Dynamoto and MyGP Racing in the description. Now, as far as my ownership experience, just riding this bike, man, it's been fantastic. I love this bike. For those that follow the channel, you guys probably know that this is my favorite bike to ride, even over the Panigale V4. Yes, the Panigale V4 does certain things better than this Aprilia, for sure. There's no doubt about it. But overall, this is my favorite bike to ride. It just does everything well. When you look at its competitors, when you look at bikes in its class, the specs are all going to be close. All the 1000cc super bikes, they're all going to be very, very close in horsepower and weight and their wheelbase, and even the suspension. It's going to be pretty similar across the board. The brakes that they use are going to be Brembo Stylemas, generally speaking. You know, they're going to be all pretty close, but this bike, the magic of this bike is just, it just has something that other bikes don't have. I think a lot of it has to do with the engine. I mean, just listen to this thing. I'm gonna pick it up here. I mean, that's me just leaning on it just a little bit, and obviously in too high of a gear I was lugging the motor a little bit, but it just has power everywhere, but it never runs out of steam up top. A lot of times what you find with naturally aspirated high performance engines is they're either strong up top and weak down low, or they're strong down low and weak up top. This bike can do both. It's really amazing. When I compare it to my Panigale V4, a lot of people say that the Panigale V4s are torquey and they make power down low, and they really don't compared to this. I mean, this makes way more power down low. It's way more usable. I don't need to be, I would say the Panigale V4, it really turns on maybe at around 9 to 10,000 RPM. This is turned on basically all the time. I mean, 4,000 RPM, 50% throttle, you're gonna get moving pretty quick. And this bike too, the wheelie control basically comes on anytime, whereas the Panigale V4, for example, just doesn't do that. And I guess I'm gonna hit every red light possible today. But it has all the performance. It's comfortable as well. You know, surprisingly, I know that the clip-on position and the peg position is pretty aggressive, but I think Aprilia has done a really good job with the seating position itself, because this bike is really comfortable to ride considering what it is. Obviously, a naked bike like a Tuono, for example, or something like that, is going to be more comfortable. I'm not saying this is the most comfortable bike ever to go across the country, but for what it is, this bike is very, very comfortable. It has cruise control as well, which when I first got the bike, I thought, that's kind of lame, you know, to have a race bike, super sport bike with cruise control. But now that I have it, I use it all the time. So I've taken this bike out of town a few times for, well, once for pleasure, but also for work-related reasons, and absolutely no issues riding this bike for a few hours. No problem at all. And it's just so stable, everything that it does. And listen to that motor. That's me, I don't know, 50-60% throttle. It just picks up, super stable in the corners. It just, everything that you want it to do, it just does with ease. It's not like my Panigale V4 that it's more nimble, it's more eager to change directions and stuff, for sure, but it feels like you're fighting it sometimes. It's just, it's not as smooth, it's not as stable. I don't know what it is. This bike, it just does everything well. That's the only way I could really put it. And it is heavy, so I know Aprilia says that the wet weight is 445 pounds or somewhere around there. And there's a good thread on Aprilia forums talking about the actual weight of these bikes, and the real wet weight for these bikes is really more like 465, 470 pounds. So these bikes are really heavy. When I'm moving it around my garage, even though this bike, it's got some weight taken off of it, of course, but moving it around the garage, it feels way heavier than my Panigale V4, and it feels even more heavy than and even more so with my old Panigale V2. It's a huge difference. But the magic with this bike though is as soon as you start moving, I mean, I'm talking as soon as you start moving, you know, 3, 4, 5 miles an hour, you don't feel that weight anymore. Aprilia has just done a really good job with hiding that weight. It's really amazing. I don't feel it at all. When it's moving, it feels just as light as my Panigale V4 and my old Panigale V2. I mean, just listen to this bike. You know, nothing sounds like that. Listen to how fast the motor tacks up. Everything is just, it's just perfect. It's just chef's kiss for this bike, basically. Me, what I really like about this bike is it doesn't get too much attention. I don't really like a ton of attention. I kind of just like to be left alone and just be on my way. With the Ducatis, I get stopped all the time, which is fine. I'll go. I'm not going to be stuck up. I'm going to talk to you and engage with you. But the Ducati, I probably get stopped at least 50% of the time. People want to ask questions or take a picture, or their kid wants to see it or whatever. With this bike, you know, maybe 1 out of 4 or 5 times I take it out, somebody will stop me. Usually it's somebody who's kind of into bikes. They're more of an enthusiast. Most people don't know what an Aprilia is, but everybody knows what a Ducati is. So for me, I do like that. It's just a little bit less attention on me, but you know, I know a lot of you probably wouldn't care about something like that. Clutch engagement is really good on this bike too. So it is a cable clutch, but so it's a little bit stiff. Your hand does get a little bit tired if you're stuck in traffic, but it's very linear. It's very easy to modulate the clutch. It's not like some of the other clutches out there that are on leader bikes where they're kind of on off, especially Ducatis are known for that, especially Ducati dry clutches. But this is really, even though it's heavy, it's very easy to modulate. So it's got a big air bubble too. The fairings are quite wide. I have an aftermarket windscreen, but even with the stock windscreen, the air bubble was quite large. So being on the freeway for a long time, the wind buffeting was really good as well. Wasn't at all bothersome for long periods of time, if you're on the freeway for a long period of time. Let's go ahead and let's get back to the garage here, talk about a few more things. But I mean, this bike is just, I mean, it's just effortless. It just does whatever you want it to do. It's not like I'm never fighting with this bike at low speed maneuvers, with really anything. I'm never fighting with being in too high of a gear, or the RPM being too low, or whatever. I'm never fighting the wind, any of those things.
Not going to lie, you guys, when I was first looking at maybe buying an Aprilia, I was kind of worried. I was a little bit scared. The issues, they are well documented, so it was a little scary. But what I did notice, and I think what really pushed me over the edge on the RSV4, was that I noticed that people would keep buying Aprilias. When you look at Kawasaki, Suzuki, even Triumph, I noticed when people buy those bikes, they kind of jump around. They'll have a ZX-10R, then they'll go to an R1 or vice versa. They'll kind of jump around. I noticed Aprilia, Ducati, people don't jump around with those brands. Once they buy one, they kind of just stick to it. And at least in my experience, that's really held to be true as far as the passion that Aprilia owners have for these bikes. I totally get it. There's just something special about these Aprilias. Are they for everybody? Absolutely not. I would make sure that if you are gonna buy an Aprilia, I would be sure that there is at least a decent, if not strong, dealer network near you. And I'm not talking about, oh, there just happens to be an Aprilia dealership within 20 miles of me. Do your research, make sure that Aprilia dealership is a reputable one. They're known for good service and so forth. So that way you have that support, because it is likely that if you buy one of these bikes, there's probably going to be something that goes wrong with it. I've been lucky, I haven't had any issues, but for something like the tank that I needed to warranty, even though that wasn't a mechanical issue. It didn't stop me from riding the bike. I still wanted it fixed. I don't want a tank with a bunch of cracks in the finish. So when that was part of my decision-making process, I knew that there was a dealership close by that is known for having good service. It's a pretty big dealership, so the likelihood of them just kind of folding up and moving on to something else is not super likely. So that's really what pushed me over the edge. One thing I forgot to mention earlier when we were riding is the heat on these bikes. It's not bad at all. I've heard some people complain about the heat, but they're just not bad. I mean, any liter bike is going to, horsepower creates heat. So there's always going to be some heat. You're gonna feel it, but it's not bad at all. I mean, where I live in California, it gets pretty hot during the summer. I mean, I'm talking some days are 100 degrees and you notice it, but it's not that bad. You never need to shut the bike off or anything like that. On these Panigales, 100-degree heat, you're probably going to be shutting the bike off if you get stuck at a stoplight or something like that. And I think that kind of adds to my claim earlier that these bikes, they're pretty usable. I use mine for transportation. I mean, I go to work with it. I've gone out of town with it. I do errands with this RSV4. There's a plane flying overhead. Try to do pretty normal things with the Aprilia just because it makes it easier to afford it. If you buy one of these super bikes, a Ducati, an Aprilia, BMW, something like that, it's expensive. It's really expensive to own it and buy it if all you're using it for is a track bike or just for weekends and stuff like that. Nothing wrong with that. You do whatever you want with your bike and your money. You do what you want with it. Just for me, it's more affordable for me to actually use it as transportation, and the RSV4 is surprisingly very good at that. Now, ownership costs, it's about like any liter bike. The insurance, it is expensive, but it is less than my Panigale V4. Oil changes and basic maintenance and stuff, it's pretty on par with any other liter bike basically. Tires are going to be expensive, valve service will be expensive of course, but really just normal maintenance on it, not bad at all. I've done a lot of the maintenance myself. I've done all the modifications myself definitely, and they're pretty easy to work on. There are some special tools that you need as far as different height Allen keys and Torx keys and stuff like that. It's a little annoying that Aprilia uses a ton of different fasteners on those bikes. I really hate that. There's all these different size Allens and Torx keys, and there's Phillips, different size bolts and stuff like that. So I really hate that Aprilia uses such a variety, but overall they're not that bad to work on. I would say most people with a decent mechanical background can work on one of those Aprilias. And honestly, overall, I think it's just been a rewarding bike to own. There's not that many of them out there. There's some cool parts available for Aprilias. The support for them as far as the aftermarket goes is not like Ducati, where Ducati, there's a ton of, you could change every single part on a Ducati. But Aprilia doesn't have that, but there's enough parts to where you can still do some interesting things with them. There's some cross compatibility between the other brands. For example, like I mentioned earlier, that fuel lid, I was able to get a Ducati, or I was able to get an AEM factory fuel lid that was intended for a Ducati to fit on the Aprilia. Aprilia from the factory has some pretty cool kind of OEM plus type parts. On the base RSV4s, you can upgrade to the RSV4 factory forged wheels and stuff like that. There's some pretty cool things you could do with these bikes, and again, they're not that hard to work on, so most people with some mechanical knowledge can put those aftermarket parts on without having to pay somebody. Okay, that's enough gushing over this bike. Things that I would change on the RSV4. The number one thing I would change is I wish the quality was a little bit better. So just little things like this, even before the carbon, this always kind of fit like that. And for how expensive these bikes cost, you really shouldn't have things like that. I found a few missing bolts on this bike, so when I put this exhaust on, I removed the exhaust servo, which on these bikes it's mounted here, and there was one of the fasteners for the exhaust servo that was completely missing. The length of the fastener and kind of where it was located, there's no way that it fell out at some point. It just wasn't put in at the factory. And there was another screw that was missing. It was something under, it was either under this, the cowl, or under the seat, but there was another fastener that was missing. To be fair, it could have fallen, that one could have fallen out at some point, but I really think it was just missing. Another one would probably be color schemes. The RSV4 color schemes are just butt ugly. I think the only decent one is probably the RSV4 factory speed white. I mean, other than that, they just have, even the 2025 color schemes, they're just ugly. They just don't, they look like a GSXR color scheme or something like, not that there's anything wrong with GSXRs, but they just, this is an Aprilia. You're paying a premium price. You should have a nice, they should be able to create a nice color scheme. And it's weird because on their MotoGP bikes and stuff like that, their color schemes are pretty cool looking, but for whatever reason, when we get them at our level, at the consumer level, we just end up with these just strange color schemes. So for me, I bought the Saxon Ring Black RSV4 just because it would be the easiest for me to convert the livery to something else. Last thing I wish Aprilia would change, I wish they would find a way to take some weight out of these bikes. Everything on these bikes is super heavy. To be fair, this is a base RSV4, but the wheels, these cast wheels, they're super heavy. All the body work is super heavy. If you ask any owner how heavy just this cowl is, not the fairings and I'm talking about just this wing portion, this thing is incredibly heavy. I mean, I wish they could find a way to take some weight out of these bikes. I mean, all this stuff, super heavy, I was amazed when, before I converted this to carbon, I was shocked how heavy the side fairings are, the belly pan is for these RSV4s. I get people asking me a lot too, would I do it again? Would I buy another Aprilia? And the answer is a resounding yes. I will definitely buy another Aprilia at some point. If we know for 2025, the RSV4 is not changed. There's been some changes, but not much. It's pretty much just a light, very, very light revision. When they do completely revise the RSV4 and go to a completely new generation, I would definitely consider it for sure. I just can't say enough, you guys, how glad I am that I took a risk on the RSV4. They're certainly not for everybody. We've talked about that earlier in the video. It's not a bike that I would recommend to just anyone, but specific, certain type of people, I would definitely recommend an RSV4. I would buy another one in a heartbeat. I don't regret the purchase, not one bit. You know, and are there bikes that are easier to own? Yeah, absolutely. There's a ton of leader bikes that are just as fast, basically, that are just an easier ownership experience. But if you're looking for something special, for something just uncommon, then Aprilia is really the way to go in my opinion. And in reality, think about it. You don't buy a leader bike, you don't buy a motorcycle in general for convenience. You just don't. If you want convenient, then you buy a car. It's just easier. Everything in a car is just easier, other than lane splitting, but unless you live in California, you can't lane split anyway. So that being said, we don't buy these bikes for convenience. There's easier pathways, but for me, this Aprilia RSV4 is my favorite bike. So if you guys stayed to the end, thank you so much. I hope the video was helpful. If you can, hit that like, hit that subscribe, check out the affiliate links and coupon codes down below. A lot more coming up for the channel. Until next time, see you on the next one.